tower, and it has that clock, is because of nostalgia for the old John Campbell built 1906 building. And it was felt that the new building would be better if it took the clock with it. And that's almost never the case. You know, if you try to get a bit of a historic building and stick it onto a new one, you make a kind of strange hybrid. And I think that that's what we've got here. We've got neither, fish nor fowl. It's a repetition of Big Ben's faces, but reconstructed and sticking out. And weirdly, they kind of look more like cell phone tower repeaters than
yes,
now.
Patrick. Hey, stay there. We'll bring Chris and Tabor in. Chris, you've seen the photo. Are you a fan of this tower?
No, I hate it, and I love Nelson, which is my favourite city outside Wellington, and I always look at that clock tower and say it's a complete excrescence. And so I would rip it down and I say, citizens, what is it about the 1960s and 1970s that we managed to build that kind of rubbish? And of course it reaches its very apotheosis with the beehive, which is an example of 1970s brutalism, and I hated working in the beehive. So I say rip down the clock, and while you're at it, rip down the civic chambers, because they're pretty dreadful.
Oh my gosh, the texts are blowing up here. Tabor Khan, you've seen the photo, do you like it?
Yeah, look, I'm not sure what's going to happen to your text once I make a comment on this, but I actually don't mind it, and I think it has to do with the fact that it has to do with the fact that, look, it is our history. It has symbolism and it has history, and it kind of speaks to a time that has passed. And for me, all of those things just add an element of beauty to it that I just appreciate.
Interesting.
So I kind of was really struggling with the word monstrosity because, I don't see it.
Patrick, is it an example of brutalism? Because I am a personal fan of a brutalism, the sort of brutalism you might see in some classic examples, the Parliament buildings in Dhaka, for example, Louis Kahn's building.
Well, it's got elements, and it certainly is of the period, but it's a bit of a milk-toast version.
Right.
It's got the cantilever and the looming, the brise soleil, the sunshades over the windows are heavy concrete, which is always a little bit alarming in an earthquake area, for example. But it isn't a thumping piece of brutalism, say like the National Library, which Chris will remember from Wellington and probably loads.
Oh, I can start on that any time.
Because it's got that inverted pyramid move that was so typical of brutalism. I believe it was an extraordinary thing to do when you look back on them. And I wouldn't rip them down. I mean, I think it's always a mistake to turn around and the thing that's at the height of its, or the depth of its fashion, and immediately rip it down, and then 10 years later people will be renting the garments at the thing we lost.
Patrick, you might have heard the text written out. Sir Miles Warren said, "Oh dear." I wonder if Ian Athfield was proud of it. We've run out of time. Patrick, thank you for your time. And Chris Finlayson and Tabor Khan, you have both been wonderful this afternoon. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Wallace.
See you. Bye.
Yeah, see you later. I'm Wallace Chapman. Checkpoint is next. Back tomorrow, 3:45. Till then, bye.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere nei, 3 police officers face manslaughter charges over the death of a man in custody at Hawera Police Station. It's alleged they were grossly negligent in their duty of care to the 55-year-old man. We talked to a former police investigator. Sorry, says Air New Zealand.
If we refunded everyone, that would have quite a significant impact on our cash flow. It would mean we would move into using the $900 million loan from the government quicker. And I suppose as a consequence of that, we would have to make some even more aggressive decisions around our cost base, what we do with labour, what we do with planes. So it's a bit of a balancing act for us.
Buckle up, Air New Zealand finally fronts for an interview.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata tēnei. Hawera residents are in a state of shock after 3 police officers were charged with manslaughter over the death of a man in custody in June last year. The officers, who have name suppression, are alleged to have failed to provide necessary medical care to the 55-year-old who died in the Princess Street police station. Local Henry Campbell says the law must now take its course.
Justice must prevail, and I hope it turns out okay,
Does it shock you?
It does a bit, yeah.
Another local, Tony Anderson, who admits that she's had her own run-in with police, says it didn't surprise her. She's outraged at the death. The 3 officers have been remanded on bail and will reappear in the High Court at New Plymouth on June 26th. Air New Zealand is apologising to customers who haven't been able to access airfare credits given out for flights cancelled in the wake of COVID-19. The airline has today spoken for the first time about its handling of non-refundable airfares, which are estimated to be worth tens of millions of dollars. Its Chief Financial Officer Cam Wallace says an improved online credit system will be available by the end of July.
People can go online, see how much they've got, go online, make a booking using the credit. So we understand that it's not smooth. It has been disappointing in terms of the amount of time people are taking to get through. We will get this fixed. We want to make sure that people have flexibility to use the service, and we want, understandably, people to be proud of the airline in the future.
Air New Zealand's Cam Wallace. You can hear the full interview on Checkpoint after the news. A cabinet paper detailing what's needed to move to Alert Level 1 has been leaked to the opposition. National leader Todd Muller quoted sections of the document drafted by the Prime Minister's office during question time today while calling for an immediate move to Level 1. Here's political reporter Joe Moyer.
A copy of the paper obtained by RNZ says there must be 28 days of no community transmission of COVID-19 before the country can safely drop alert levels. Todd Muller says Jacinda Ardern should make a captain's call and ease restrictions now, given the 28 days requirement has been met. But the Director-General of Health says that hasn't yet been achieved, as one person is still recovering. The document says Cabinet will shortly consider a suite of papers on ongoing border controls and exemptions. From Parliament, Joe Moyer.
The Tourism Minister Kelvin Davis says it's unrealistic to think the government can prop up the sector at pre-COVID-19 levels until the borders reopen. He will announce tomorrow how a $400 million rescue package will be spent, but has already hinted it will go on marketing and helping businesses to transition from international to domestic tourism. Mr Davis says an important part of the funding will help rescue strategic businesses, which a number of other operators rely on for their own survival. But he says the government will not be able to save them all.
To fund all tourism businesses at pre-COVID levels until borders open is unsustainable, and it's unfair on other industries as well that are also doing it tough in these times.
Kelvin Davis. Protesters in US cities are defying curfews on the 8th night of protests across the country. In New York, the curfew has come into force 3 hours earlier because of looting overnight, though the protests today have been peaceful. Peter Jolly is a New Zealander living in New York and says he doesn't feel unsafe leaving home, but the city feels on edge. He says a lot of people left the city during the pandemic and the unrest may keep them away.
Long-time New York residents who we know have lived here for like 15 months, but some of our friends who've lived here for a long time think it'll take a long, long time for New York to come back.
New Zealander Peter Jolly. The police have seized property and shares worth millions of dollars in a Hamilton cannabis bust. A man was also arrested and charged. Chen Liu reports.
The assets, valued at over $2.4 million, are linked to a senior tribal Hak gang member and an associate. A 49-year-old man has also been arrested today and charged with possession of cannabis. The police say the gang have been involved with the sale, supply and distribution of cannabis in Waikato over a number of years. Between 2017 and 2019, 8 properties linked to the gang were raided, and arrests and charges were made each time. Assets worth $124 million were seized nationally in the last 18 months, and about 80% of them stem from drugs, guns and organised crime. Quo Chen Liu Aho.
It's coming up to 5 minutes past 5. All Blacks are joining those around the world taking a public stand against racism amidst ongoing rioting in the US. Both hooker Cody Taylor and First Five Josh Ioane have posted the Black Square image on social media, showing their support in the wake of the death of George Floyd in police custody in Minneapolis last week. Taylor wants to use his standing as an All Black to raise awareness about racism, which he says is everywhere.
Racism isn't just in America, it's all around the world, and I think it's awesome that people, public figures, are really trying to step out and make it more of an awareness. I'm of Māori descent, but I'm also of Pākehā descent, so it's pretty moving to see that people want change, and I think the more we can make people aware, then hopefully that can happen.
Cody Taylor. A proposal to resume the interrupted NBA basketball season is expected to be voted this week. Broadcaster ESPN says the proposal, which includes only the top 22 teams and a restart date of July 31st, will be presented by Commissioner Adam Silver to the league's board tomorrow. That's the news.
On the brink of level 1,
the number of new cases, the number of active cases, the economic ramifications, the readiness of the public health system, contact tracing and compliance issues. Across all those six, we have reached the stage we need to be at level 1.
While house prices teeter on the edge of the cliff.
Gee, we've just been in lockdown, we've come out and we're all back to where we were, but unfortunately I don't think that it is.
And the US is on the verge of chaos.
The fish rots from the head, and here it's rotting from our White House.
Live from Te Upoko o Te Ika. Morning Report, weekdays from 6, on air and online.
Now the short forecast from mid-service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Taranaki, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Rain spreading south tonight, briefly heavy, followed by occasional showers. Possible thunderstorms in the north and west. For Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, generally fine. Scattered rain this evening and a few spots of rain from afternoon tomorrow. Whanganui to Wellington, also Wairarapa, fine at first. Cloud increasing and occasional rain from evening, possibly heavy tomorrow. Marlborough, Nelson and Buller, rain developing tonight, possibly heavy. Clearing in Buller tomorrow. For Westland and Fiordland, periods of rain. Snow lowering to 800 metres tomorrow morning, then clearing to fine from the afternoon. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, cloud increasing. Scattered rain tonight, becoming widespread tomorrow with snow lowering to about 800 metres. For Chatham Islands, low cloud, drizzly patches turning to rain tomorrow. You're with RNZ National. It's 7.5 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna, and welcome to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. Coming up, more on the situation in Taranaki, where 3 Hawera police officers have today been charged with manslaughter over the death of a man in custody in June last year. Plus, we go to the United States, where protests continue, and get a glimpse of what level 1 will look like as early as next week. But let's begin tonight with our national carrier. The airline says sorry, but the severity of its financial situation means Air New Zealand simply can't afford to refund everyone without dipping into its $900 million government loan facility. The airline says post-COVID-19, it's carrying hundreds of thousands of credits for cancelled or deferred flights or trips customers simply can't take. It's refunded flights to or through the United States, and anywhere else it won't fly to again, like Buenos Aires. But everyone else gets a credit, and that has caused a huge customer backlash, with many people saying they're facing tough financial times too, and they need the cash back. Consumer New Zealand has repeatedly asked the national carrier to show some fairness and make exceptions to its policy. But to put things in perspective, Air New Zealand says last April it flew 1.4 million passengers. This April, it was just 15,000. I spoke to Air New Zealand's Chief Revenue Officer, Cam Wallace, and started by asking whether Air New Zealand has the financial resources to give a refund to everyone who wants one.
If we refunded everyone, that would have quite a significant impact on our cash flow. It would mean we would move into using the $900 million loan from the government quicker. And I suppose as a consequence of that, we would have to make some even more aggressive decisions around our cost base, what we do with labour, what we do with planes. So it's a bit of a balancing act for us.
So are you telling us that it's jobs or refunds? You'll cut jobs or you can give refunds?
Well, no, as you know, we've been, unfortunately, and it's pretty distressing actually, having to release a whole bunch of people anyway. So we would have to accelerate that. The challenge for us is this is such a unique and unparalleled event on aviation that it costs a lot to run in New Zealand. Pre-COVID is about $400 million a month. So whilst $900 million sounds like a lot of money, and we will draw down on that loan, we're trying to do all possible to run the business where we have a very, very small amount of revenue coming in the door, and we still have significant costs.
I just want to be clear on this because it's really important. On the one hand, you've said to me that it's in the high hundreds of thousands that you would have to refund people if you gave refunds to everyone who wants them.
That's a high hundreds of thousands of credits.
Right. So tell me what the dollars is. Roundabout.
I don't have the dollars, and that
you must know that. Give me a ballpark.
It's a significant amount of money.
Okay, well, you're saying in this letter to Consumer New Zealand, in essence, that if you had to pay up that money, it has the potential to put you in a delicate financial position. So are you running that close to the bone?
So we've got revenue and cost forecasts, as you'd expect, for the next 2 years. I think we've made it clear that the business will be smaller for longer than we originally anticipated, but we see some rebound in the domestic market, but we still have significant costs in this business. And at some stage shortly, in the next 3 to 6 months, you expect us to start to use the government loan. But what we're trying to do is do everything possible, not just with labour, but with revenue, with all our costs, to maintain a level in terms of getting the right balance between cost and revenue.
So if you were to pay these customers their money back, you would have to dip into that $900 million loan facility.
Undoubtedly, it would accelerate our requirement to dip into the loan, undoubtedly.
If you want people to understand this, then give us a ballpark figure. How many millions are you talking about in potential refunds?
It's tens of millions of dollars. It's not an insignificant amount of money, and there is a lot of people who have credits. There's no doubt about that.
Okay. How do you think you've treated your customers through this? Because we've had a lot of communication with our listeners who are saying that you are failing miserably in terms of communicating your position, in terms of them accessing their credits. How well do you think you've done?
Oh, look, I think we need to apologise in terms of the way people can avail or use the credits. That has been a disappointment for us, and I am deeply sorry for that. We hadn't anticipated that there would be leisure travel allowed in level 2. So we've been working with about 55 people working on a digital solution ready to be released in late July so that it's more accessible.
Late July?
More accessible and easier to use the credits. People can use the credits now. We've got a lot of flexibility, so if they bought a ticket to Singapore, they might be able to use it to Queenstown and Christchurch. They can have a retained credit.
But Cam, they can't see their credits. What they're saying to us is they can't see their credit anywhere. When they ring up, they can't immediately access the credit. A person who I spoke to today said that they got a message saying that you'd get back to them within 14 days, which is after the point that they wish to book a flight. It kind of sounds like a complete schmozzle, doesn't it?
Oh, well, I mean, I think it has to be looked at in the context of the impact that COVID's had on our business. And the facts are that we have had a massive impact. We've been trying to get our customer experience a lot better. We've put more people into the contact centre. We're getting more and more people in there. We do have the facilities to make this work, but we're just asking for some patience for our customers because, yes, we want to have the facility that people can go online, see how much they've got, go online, make a booking using the credit. So we understand that it's not smooth. It has been disappointing in terms of the amount of time people are taking to get through. We will get this fixed. We want to make sure that people have flexibility, they use the service, and we want, understandably, people to be proud of the airline in the future.
Do you accept that you have not done well enough here, that you have not done well enough?
Look, I agree that the process for availing or using these credits has not been smooth. It hasn't been fast and efficient enough. It has been a number of factors that have impacted on that. Probably the biggest single factor is that in level 2, restrictions under COVID, We originally anticipated we would have less planes flying, and leisure travel originally wasn't allowed in level 2. So we had a timeline for a digital solution. We want to make it right, and we want to make it work, but we're very, very aware that there's a lot of customer dissatisfaction. Similarly, there are some people who are happy to have the credit, they're happy to have it to be used in a year or 2 years' time. So
understand
there is
that,
mixed feedback.
They need to be able to access that. So that's the credits.
Absolutely.
In terms of your customers who want a refund and you're not giving it to them, do you think that's fair? Because this government has asked people to be fair and kind during this time. And the argument would be that the New Zealand taxpayer has been fair and kind to you. You've had $70 million plus in wage subsidies, and you've got a taxpayer-backed $900 million loan facility. So are you returning the kindness to your customers, some of whom desperately need refunds because their circumstances have changed?
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to do that through providing flexibility like we've never provided before for our customers, and that is the length of time they can use the credits, the places they can use the credits, and they'll be able to retain the value of the credits. So what we've tried to do is...
But again, that's a credit, not money, isn't it? And that is the sticking point.
Yeah, I mean, that is generally the way that we deal with non-refundable fares, is we do apply credits. We usually have more restrictions on those credits, so what we've tried to do is say we want that current process to be in play, but we will extend the time that people can use it, the length of time, and also the different destinations. So within that framework, we've tried to be as fair and reasonable as we possibly can.
Be clear with me on this. If you gave refunds to the people who want it, would it sink Air New Zealand?
Oh, look, it would be a considerable impact on our bottom line.
So what's a considerable impact? Would it make you insolvent? Would it send you to the floor?
You know we have a $900 million facility from the government. The challenge
exactly. So why not use it?
Well, because if we use it, it would accelerate our financial position and having to use it earlier, and it would mean that we make different decisions in terms of reducing our cost base. So these are the challenges we have to make.
So where do you think you're going to fly to if indeed there is a trans-Tasman bubble and potentially the Pacific? What are you gearing up for specifically?
So historically before or pre-COVID, we had 80 flights a week to Australia, and it was about 22% of our business. So it's pretty significant for us. So we'd be flying to, everywhere from Perth to Adelaide, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Coolangatta, Cairns, etc. So we're very confident and motivated about the Tasman bubble because Australia just offers such a range of different destinations and a raft of different attractions for Kiwis to go. So we would be pretty confident that we'd have a similar network offering to what we had going into COVID, and the same with the Pacific Islands. The Pacific Islands is a smaller part of our business, but as important.
What about other destinations? I mean, Vietnam is saying it wants to be in Australia's bubble. Are you looking at that? Are there other international places that might open up in some kind of bubble that you're preemptively looking at?
No, we are in a number or numerous working groups trying to establish the trans-Tasman bubble first, and the reason for that is, one, it's a high-density market for us. It's where a lot of our capital is deployed, so we could get a lot of planes flying quite quickly. We also think because it's a short-haul destination, you can stimulate the market a lot quicker on short-haul. Kiwis seem to be pretty comfortable with the way both countries have handled the outbreak, so we're very fixated on using the test case of Australia first and then going on to the Pacific Islands. And then once people are more comfortable with travelling between those short-haul destinations, we think long-haul will be a logical extension of those. I mean, any country where we have services to or could open up services to, and we think there's a viable proposition, we'll be dead keen to try and implement long-haul services. We do have obviously a lot of long-haul aircraft, we've got a lot of crew, and we've got a lot of people who are really keen to get going. But we only want to do it if it's safe and if the public are confident in the proposition. So even the Tasman, because it will be the only place in the short to medium term that Kiwis can travel international, we actually might surge some capacity. So we actually put more planes or bigger planes on that market because we do think there will be underlying demand.
How quickly can you do that, Cam? 1 week, 2 weeks? How much warning do you need?
We can do that very, very quickly. We've got the aircraft, we've got the crew, we are ready to go. And we actually, when we've been looking at our staff numbers and the labour required, we've got flexibility in that, which means we're carrying some costs, but we're very mindful of, as soon as that decision got made, if it was positive, that we could deploy our assets quite quickly. We're actually flying very limited services, primarily for cargo to Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane at the moment, 2 or 3 services a week. So we are we're just operating with skeleton services, and it's primarily for cargo and frankly expats coming home because they have to do the 2-week stand down.
If your financial situation is as you describe it, particularly in regard to the refunds, I mean, what about the redundancies? You're making, 4,000 staff redundant? Can you afford that? Can you afford the redundancies?
Yeah, well, that's a pretty distressing thing for us because we've got so many committed Air New Zealand staff who are just fantastic ambassadors for, literally the country and the company. So it's been kind of heartbreaking to see people lose their jobs and leave the business. We're pretty close to concluding that. There's a number of people through the process. So clearly that's in our forecast in terms of our cash flow as well, and we wouldn't be embarking on that if we didn't have the funds to be able to pay for it.
Will you need to use that $900 million facility to accommodate the redundancy payments?
No, we will not have to.
Cam, before you go, I want to give you the opportunity to speak directly to your customers. What would you like to say to them?
Well, firstly, I'd like to say thank you so much for your patience. I understand there's been a level of frustration getting through to the contact centre and making the bookings with the credits. We apologise for that. We're dealing with the biggest event in aviation history. Please bear with us, and we are very committed to making you proud in the future about your airline, and we are going to be part of the rebuild of tourism in this country. So thank you for your time, and thank you for your patience.
And that was Air New Zealand's Chief Revenue Officer, Cam Wallace. It is 22 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Let us know what you think of that. Air New Zealand says it can't afford to give everybody refunds, even if they want them. They would need to dip into that $900 million loan facility underwritten by the government. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The South Taranaki town of Hawera is reeling after 3 of its police officers were charged with manslaughter over the death of a man in custody in June last year. The officers, who have name suppression, allegedly failed to provide necessary medical care to the 55-year-old who died in the Princes Street police station. Our reporter, Robin Martin, is in Hawera.
The dead man, who the coroner has ruled cannot be named, was arrested following a family harm incident at a Hawera address at 11:30 on the night of May the 31st, 2019. The police arrested the man, who they said at the time was intoxicated, for assault and took him back to Princes Street. During a routine check, he was discovered to be unresponsive, and police began CPR, and the volunteer fire service were called to help at about 2:30 the following morning. Paramedics pronounced him dead some 30 minutes later. Today, the 3 officers responsible for the man's care appeared in the New Plymouth District Court, facing a maximum penalty of life imprisonment. The Mayor of Hawera, Phil Nixon, says it's a sad day for everyone involved.
These things are obviously a shock to the community. It was a shock to the community when we lost a member of the community in a police cell. It's obviously a shock to the community to hear that 3 officers have now been charged. And so my feelings certainly go out to the family of the victim who died a year ago. My thoughts are out with the police officers and their families.
Mr Nixon says the timing of the charges is also unfortunate, with events unfolding in the United States following the death of George Floyd.
Oh, look, people will obviously link these things with it, but I mean, they are totally separate, nothing to do with each other. But yeah, it is very sad. It is not good timing.
Former Pātea police officer, National MP and chairman of the government's Justice Advisory Group, Chester Burrows, says unfortunately these types of incidents have happened before. Mr Burrows says the nature of rural policing is that there is a pressure on numbers, and officers recruited to small towns are often straight out of police college with little experience.
There are other things to contend with too, like for instance a lack of supervision, frequently working on your own or with one other person who may not have a whole lot more experience than the other officer. So there are those sorts of pressures on staffing
country stations.
Mr Burrows says it's likely people in Hawera know all the people involved in the incident. Police Minister Stuart Nash says the fact that charges have been laid indicates that any death in custody is not taken lightly.
The police do take this seriously. This was investigated by the police themselves. They recommended pressing charges. The police sought external advice on this. It is before the courts, and I think I need to leave it at that.
Meanwhile, in Hawera, people gave mixed responses to the news of the charges. Henry Campbell said he was shocked to hear what happened.
Whatever happened is up to justice must prevail, and I hope it turns out okay, yeah.
Does it shock you?
It does a bit, yeah.
Caroline found the news unsettling.
I'm a good citizen and I hope never to be arrested, but I don't like to think of anybody actually being killed at the hands of our safest people, I guess. I think that maybe he should have been looked up after even more so if he was perhaps on some mind-altering substance, whether it's alcohol or whatever. He was obviously in a state.
Tony Anderson, who admitted she'd had her own run-ins with the police, wasn't surprised.
I'm outraged. I'm outraged at what the police get away with. They lie. They stand together.
They should be held accountable, don't you?
And they're bullies. They're acting like gang. They're thugs. And by far our biggest threat. Whenever our kids go out, we worry about their safety.
The 3 officers were remanded on bail and will reappear in the High Court at New Plymouth on June the 26th. I Hawera mo te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Robin Martin.
President of the Police Association, Chris Cahill, has been offering support to the 3 charged police officers. He's provided us with a statement, which he reads for us now.
The New Zealand Police Association is supporting the 3 officers who are now facing manslaughter charges in relation to the death of a man in the Hawera Police Station cells in June last year. The officers are members of the association, and as such they are entitled to legal and welfare support. While I will not make any comments about the detail of the case, I think it is important to note that there is absolutely no suggestion that the death was a result of any physical or violent confrontation between the officers and the deceased. Any death of a person in police custody is a tragic situation for the family of the deceased, and in this case for the officers involved and their families. It is now a matter for the court, and we will leave the court to do its work. Any speculation prior to the full facts of the situation being disclosed in court would be a disservice to the deceased and his family and police officers involved.
That's your statement, Chris. Can I ask you for clarification about the 3rd paragraph where you say there's no suggestion that the death was a result of physical or violent confrontation? Can you tell us what you mean by that?
Well, simply that the death is not alleged to have been occurred because of any application of force by any police officers.
Have you seen some evidence around that?
I'm aware that's a fact.
So, can you explain why they've been charged?
Unfortunately, I think it's best that we let that come out through the fullness of the court process. I don't want to get in front of that process.
Is it an absence of something, then, that has resulted in the charge rather than the presence of something?
That would be a fair summation, but without all the facts, it's better to wait till you see them.
Have you got all the information? Are you privy to the matters behind this case?
I'm privy to those matters, yes, but I think it's appropriate that the court is where those matters are aired.
I'm just wanting also to clarify, potentially officers investigating the matter are also members of the Police Association. So do you offer them support in these situations as well?
They're certainly able to look for support on a welfare level, but police have the first responsibility to look after those, given the needs to be some delineation. But it's something that we have to work through. And certainly, as I said, no one involved in this situation is finding it easy.
Do you know of a situation where any officers have been charged with manslaughter previously in New Zealand?
I personally am not aware of any others.
So potentially this is the first time this has happened?
Potentially, but certainly in my memory.
And what about the family of the deceased? Have you had any contact with them?
No, it's more appropriate that police deals with that side of things. Then again, they get confused with different persons dealing with them.
And that was the president of the Police Association, Chris Cahill. Kiwis have been given a glimpse of Alert Level 1, their efforts under lockdown finally bearing fruit, near normality on the horizon. But for many, it hasn't come quick enough. The opposition want Level 1 now. The National Party has today heaped pressure on the government to move quicker, demanding the Prime Minister take charge and drop all the restrictions. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
A look ahead at Level 1 of the Prime Minister laying out the rules, or lack of them, for the next stage of New Zealand's battle with COVID-19.
Our churches will be able to return to full service, our sports and concert stadiums can be sold out, and we can celebrate and we can mourn with one another in groups of any size.
Cabinet will make the call on Monday over whether to move to near normality. No more restrictions on business, no requirement for social distancing, no limits on gatherings in or outdoors.
Ultimately, Level 1 represents us getting the virus under control, but the war doesn't end so long as COVID is still around the world.
But with another day of 0 new cases, the 12th now in a row, it looks increasingly like the war has been won at home, and the opposition is growing impatient for the next stage.
Why isn't New Zealand already in Alert Level 1? Why is she so reticent? Why wait to midnight Wednesday?
And all culminating in this, the new opposition leader Todd Muller pushing the Prime Minister to take charge.
Prime Minister, isn't it time for a captain's call on Level 1 so a team of 5 million New Zealanders can get back to rebuilding this country and recovering their jobs?
Mr. Speaker, I have proudly made captain's calls all the way through, and it is one of the reasons that alongside our team of 5 million, we are the envy of the world in terms of our position right now.
Jacinda Ardern says she's following the advice of scientists, epidemiologists and the Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield.
If the member thinks he knows more than all of them combined, I congratulate him, but I would rather listen to the advice, get it right and not risk our economy.
The jeers only grew in volume, with frustration evident on either side of the House. National's Paul Goldsmith later chastising the Finance Minister Grant Robertson for his attitude.
Rather than continually congratulating himself and his government, would he not do better to acknowledge that as one of the most isolated countries in the world, with a small, sparsely spread and relatively young population, New Zealand should have led the world in getting top of the virus, and we have.
I think the member does a disservice to the 5 million New Zealanders who've sacrificed a great deal to get us to the position we're in. We should be proud of New Zealanders' efforts, not belittling of them.
I stand by every decision we have made to date.
Under Level 1, the border will remain closed. Indeed, precautions there are being bolstered. Dr Bloomfield says from next week, every person who arrives in the country will be tested for COVID-19.
So we really want to make sure our border is watertight.
Kiwis will also be asked to stick to their new hygiene practices, washing their hands, staying home if sick, and keeping track of their movements. It's a world away from the strict lockdown of March. New Zealand approaching a new normal, which is actually close to normal, and perhaps only 1 week away. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, the Ministry of Health ramps up testing at the border as the number of COVID cases remains at 0. You may have seen their video. It went viral. We talked to the young American entrepreneurs who were racially profiled and verbally harassed while using the gym in their office building. And the government tackles period poverty by rolling out free sanitary products in some Waikato schools. We would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or flick us an email. The address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's get to the headlines now with Susanna.
Air New Zealand is apologising to customers who haven't been able to access credits for flights cancelled because of COVID-19. It's the first time the airline has spoken after backlash about its handling of non-refundable airfares, which are estimated to be worth tens of millions of dollars. Its Chief Financial Officer Cam Wallace told Checkpoint he's deeply sorry for the confusion and an improved online credit system will be available by the end of July. Hawera residents are in shock after 3 police officers were charged with manslaughter over the death of a man in custody in June last year. The officers are alleged to have failed to provide necessary medical care to the 55-year-old who died in the Princess Street police station. The president of the Police Association, Chris Cahill, told Checkpoint the officers are being supported and says the death was not a result of physical or violent confrontation. Nationals leader has quoted sections of a cabinet paper during question time while calling for an immediate move to level 1. The document states there must be 28 days of no community transmission of COVID-19 before the country can safely move to level 1, which the Director General of Health says hasn't yet been achieved. The police have seized property and shares worth more than $2.4 million in a Hamilton cannabis bust. One man has been arrested and charged with possession. The Pentagon has moved 1,600 troops into Washington, D.C. in the 8th night of protests in the United States. Tens of thousands of people have defied curfews across the country to continue demonstrations over the death of African-American man George Floyd in police custody. The organisers of the Black Lives Matter protests in New Zealand will not be charged. It follows calls from the Deputy Prime Minister to prosecute organisers for flouting Alert Level 2 rules. Motorists are being asked to avoid the Shotover Street and Camp Street area in central Queenstown after a water main burst this afternoon. Diversions are in place. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. And it's time for the business news now with Nona Peltier. Nona, the government is being encouraged to invest in digital technology as part of what? An economic recovery development strategy? So what's the plan?
The idea is that technology pretty much is equal to or outpaces the exports that we do for the wine industry, for example. And it was and has been about our third largest export earner. And with tourism out of the way, unfortunately, we're looking at other kinds of things we can do. One of the things that's being recommended by the government's it's an advisory council set up by the government called the Digital Council. And they did a report to the government today on what we could do right away to improve our competitiveness internationally. And one of them is to put, for example, sensors into our infrastructure projects, which would gather data and so on, which businesses can use to give themselves a competitive edge in the world. And that's just one example of how you could use digital technology, but there's calls from all across the sector, financial services, and today I was talking to a group that's interested in how we can move forward on, for example, having a conversation on training, opportunities, and just a huge host of things. But the conversation needs to start, and that's one of the things the Digital Council said today. We have to start talking about it, and so that's what we're doing today.
Good start.
Yeah.
Okay, so Sky City also is finding, it says, business better than it expected despite ongoing restrictions. So what's it reporting here?
Yeah, well, since May 14th, it's given the market an update, and it said that really things were a lot better than they expected. So they got about 80% of their daily average revenue from their gaming machines, which is more than they were expecting. And hotel occupancy, about 32% of what they had been getting. But they said on the weekends they were getting 90% occupancy with all the deals that they've been offering. Now, they're still working out the details of how they're going to make people redundant. There's some 700. That hasn't actually been worked out yet. But when they do finally get to it, they expect to make cost savings about $50 million. And look, the market really liked that and said that their share price rose, nearly 9% today, which was good. It was even higher earlier. And in line with the rest of the market. You know, where Asia is about back to where they were 3 months ago, all up, and including New Zealand. So today we gained 0.75%. That's 84 points up to 11,118. So those are back to those early March levels before all of this lockdown and so on started. Now, if you looked at Australia, they were up 1.7%. So really quite strong results across the board. The New Zealand dollar is a real surprise today. It rose, yesterday we were talking at 62.8 cents, which had been pretty good. 64.1 today against the US dollar. That's like more than a cent up.
Yeah.
That's a lot. And 92.4 Australian, holding firm there because the Australian dollar has also gained quite strongly against the US. 50.9 British pence.
Still over the 50 mark.
You
All right,
betcha.
thanks, Nona. That's Nona Peltier with our numbers and business news. The protests have continued in the US today, despite President Trump threatening to unleash the military if demonstrators persist over the death of African-American man George Floyd in police custody. Protesters have defied curfews in a number of cities tonight. George Floyd's family has urged protesters to contain their rage and focus on pursuing justice, a call most have heeded. Our World Watch reporter Annabelle Reid has more.
Undeterred, protesters have been back on the streets. Tens of thousands again gathered outside the White House for peaceful demonstrations, defying a curfew, determined to make themselves heard. Yesterday, they were forcibly cleared out so the president could cross the road for a photo opportunity, moments after he threatened to mobilise the military to dominate the streets. Today, the man poised to take on Donald Trump for the White House, Joe Biden, says the president has turned the country into a battlefield.
The president held up the Bible at St. John's Church yesterday. I just wish he opened it once in a while instead of brandishing it. If he opened it, he could have learned something. They're all called to love one another as we love ourselves. It's really hard work, but it's the work of America.
While most protests have been peaceful, there was looting in New York overnight, something the governor, Andrew Cuomo, publicly criticised.
What happened in New York City was inexcusable. First, the NYPD and the mayor did not do their job last night.
The city's curfew was brought forward to 8 p.m. and will remain there for the rest of the week. No charges have yet been brought against the other 3 officers involved in George Floyd's death. His family accompanied tens of thousands of people in a march through his hometown, Houston, Texas, where he'll also be laid to rest. Mr. Floyd's brother Terrence again called for peace.
I don't want anybody coming and looting and rioting and anger. Even though you're angry, we're coming and we're doing this in peace because I say it again, as I said it before, we have to do a different strategy.
The mother of George Floyd's 6-year-old girl told reporters she wants justice for George and for the little girl he's left behind.
At the end of the day, they get to go home and be with their families. Gianna does not have a father. He will never see her grow up, graduate. He will never walk her down the aisle.
Tonight, 1,600 troops have been moved into the DC area as authorities brace for any violence. Officials on alert in other cities too, in an increasingly divided nation. For Checkpoint, Annabelle Reid.
Just one day after George Floyd died after having his neck knelt on by a white police officer in Minneapolis, a white man confronted a group of African-American entrepreneurs while using their private office gym. The confrontation was caught on video and showed the man, who was also a tenant in the building, demanding proof the men belonged there before he appeared to call the police.
I'm a tenant in the building. Are you?
We're all tenants in this building.
What office?
Don't worry about that. We're not saying this.
What office?
So we have an office here, and this guy came accusing us we can't be here.
What office are you in?
Don't worry about that. We don't have to tell you anything.
I'm calling 911 now.
Go ahead.
Co-leaders of marketing business top figure Salman Almi and Abdi Hassan are the businessmen and tenants in that building that were subjected to the racial profiling. They spoke to me from Minneapolis via Skype a short time ago.
We were just like shook, I just couldn't believe what we were experiencing in the moment, so much was going through. But the biggest thing for us is how we handled ourselves, not to give him the reaction that he expected, not to give him, weapons to use against us, not to give him any of the reaction he wanted, We just stayed calm, collected, and just, we knew what we were experiencing in the moment, and it's all about how you handle yourself.
You were incredibly polite to him. And obviously, was it one of you filming or was it one of your friends who was with you filming?
Yeah, my colleague, our other business partner was filming.
Yeah, so you were incredibly calm and super polite to him. But doesn't it make you angry when that happens to you? And does it happen very often?
Yeah, it's definitely it's easy to get angry when it happens. It happens quite often to a lot of people like us, just trying to make it in the business world is already hard it is for us, and facing, like racism and like being profiled is already extra weight, that we shouldn't have to deal with. It's not fair that we're having to deal with things like this, but we understand it's our reality. There's nothing we can do about it. There's nothing we can, there's not a formula to get rid of it. We're going to keep facing it. We just have to the main reason was for our voice to be heard and for people to know how to handle themselves in situations like this, because it is going to keep happening. This isn't the first time. This isn't going to be the last time. And it's going to continuously be happening. And it all comes down to how we handle ourselves.
So this happened the day after George Floyd was killed?
The day after. That's the shocking reality. We did not expect this to happen. And the crazy and sad part is, the gentleman told us, we were shocked, and we asked him, like, hey, did you were you, aware of this situation happening? Were you aware of the Amy Cooper situation in New York? And he was like, sadly, he said, I don't watch the news. I don't watch the news because it's a bit depressing. And we're like, you really have to pay attention to things that are happening. And really, it's crazy. It's wild.
There's no way he knew what's going on. He knew with everything. There's no way he would have not known. With he definitely knew what was going on with everything, and he knew when he made that threat, like what he was doing. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Has there been any repercussions in terms of what's happened? Has anything happened to him?
Yes, so we've learned that and the building owner of the property reached out to us, was so kind, and letting us know that, hey, yes, you guys do belong, and this is. This behavior can't be tolerated. And, we've learned that his lease has been terminated from the building.
So there's been a lot going on in your part of the world recently, and the marches in Minneapolis. What do you make watching that? And have you been part of any of the marches?
We have, yes. Just a few 2 days ago, we were part of the largest protest here that was happening, and it's one thing, you see these kind of things online, really, and like, especially, from the countries that our parents are from, you see this unrest, and being in America, our parents escaping that and coming here and start seeing burnt buildings, and burnt down, like, police killings and like this kind of stuff like happening in a really developed, you would think a really developed part of the world. And it's crazy to see that stark reality happening in your own backyard.
I've seen something that you've posted, and it talks about the fact that, you don't condone violence of any kind, do you mean, from anyone with any views?
Absolutely, yes. And the thing is, it's very important because the thing is, violence isn't the answer to anything. It's not going to solve anything. It's going to really not. It's going to decredit, what your message is. You're not going to be able to really address situations like this. You're not going to, because you can't fight fire with fire. You have to, you have
use other tactics.
Yeah, you have to fight it with positivity, love, and understanding, because we don't know what people are going through. We don't know what their minds, contain, and that hate or we just don't know it. So we have to be able to show a different and a positive light.
Exactly. And just to add on to that, as he mentioned, we don't know how, people, what they're going through is when people agitate you and get you upset, they want a reaction. That's the biggest thing, When you give them a reaction, you gave them exactly what they're looking for. Then you become the problem, not them. You become the problem because you escalated things, So the way you got to handle yourself is you have to be calm. You have to stay collected. And it's very hard. Don't get it wrong. It's not something easy to do. It wasn't easy for us to just hold our mouth at that moment, bite our tongue. We knew there's a bigger message. We knew the world is going to see this eventually, that there's people like this who is in the VC world, So he's actually handling money and investing in people. And think of how many people he turned down just because of their skin color,
Hey, what has been the reaction? Because obviously we live, thousands of kilometres away, and we saw the video, we saw what happened. What has been the reaction?
We've got an overwhelmingly amount of support, especially from our socials, our Instagram, our emails have been flooded with so much support, and people just all across the world saying, hey, we're with you. You guys do belong, and it was amazing to see that, and it really was set a good place in our heart, and it was a really good positive message that people were giving us. Of course, there's some trolls, but overall the message was good, very positive.
What do you think the protests that are happening at the moment, what will they change? What is going to happen, do you think?
It's changed a lot. We're in a time of history. We're making history right now, with all the riots, all the looting. This country, it's going insane right now. And honestly, people are just fed up. People are just tired. There has been peaceful protesting. The message doesn't get heard, and now with riots, it got the attention of the president. It got the attention of the military. It's getting the attention of everybody. So the court systems and everybody they're going to take these things into consideration now, moving forward. They have to put things in place. They have to actually start making things fair to a certain extent. Justice is going to eventually be solved, but the people did get hurt, with everything that's been, they definitely did get hurt. There's no more quiet, there's no more behind the scenes. So it's definitely out there now. And we're definitely not promoting it. But honestly, I think this was the only way to get the attention, with everything that's going on. We live in a country that's moving so fast that 1 second, the next thing comes, the next thing comes, the next thing comes. So it's like, finally, people were they just seeing how traumatizing George lost his life. Very sad. Probably one of the saddest things I've witnessed, to take another human being's life like that. Very sad, very sad. So the message definitely got heard by the whole United States and the world.
And that was Abdi Hassan and Salman Almi speaking there from Minneapolis. It is 9 minutes away from 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The government is tackling period poverty by rolling out access to free period products in schools. During Term 3, the Ministry of Education program will start in 15 schools in Waikato before expanding to all state and state integrated schools on an opt-in basis from next year. Minister for Women, Julianne Genter, says menstruation is a fact of life for half the population and access to these products is a necessity, not a luxury. Political reporter Yvette McCullough has more.
Period poverty is a major barrier for young girls' education. Research has shown that possibly as many as 12% of girls in New Zealand stay home during their periods because they can't afford pads and tampons. Julianne Genter says that needs to change.
For some girls, it will make a huge difference, and it will be all the difference. It's really important. This is just a basic necessity of life. It shouldn't be getting in the way of young people going to school.
The $2.6 million program will begin with a trial at 15 schools in the Waikato before being rolled out across the country. Ms Genter says Waikato was chosen because it had a wide mix of socio-economic need.
That'll be a bit of a pilot to see what works and help us refine the program as it is fully rolled out over the course of next year to all secondary, intermediate, primary schools and kura.
There will be a range of products available, but with a focus on environmental sustainability, including plastic-free tampons and pads. Dignity NZ runs a Buy One, Give One program to provide sanitary products to those in need. Its director, Jacinta Gulasakram, says she is delighted by the announcement, and this is what her organisation has been pushing for.
This means that there will be a more consistent rollout of products to all schools, that there have been gaps that other providers haven't been able to fill or that schools may have been left off the radar.
She says it will be important that the program is set up to ensure it is as straightforward, efficient and stigma-free as possible.
Whether you're caught short or you are living in poverty, you should be able to access these items without having that stigma attached, whether that's freely available in the bathrooms or at the nurse's office.
Schools will need to opt into the program, and Ms Gulasakram has this message for boards of trustees considering whether to sign up as the program rolls out.
Take this up. This is an issue in New Zealand. There should not be shame involved with periods, no matter what decile of school that you're at. That this is just like having toilet paper at school. It is a necessity product.
Julianne Genter says she's discussing with the Ministry of Education how to enhance the program so that it can also help change attitudes around periods so that there isn't a sense of shame or embarrassment around having one. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Yvette McCullough.
The government is putting just over $400 million towards funding innovation and research in the wake of the COVID-19 crisis. The package is primarily made up of investments announced in the budget, although an additional $120 million has been set aside for Crown Research Institutes. While the money is welcome, some scientists are critical of the package, saying it isn't targeted. Harry Locke reports.
Beneficiaries of the $400 million package include the nationally significant collection of plants and animals and Callaghan Innovation, which will receive roughly $10 million each. The money is a combination of funds announced in the budget last month, as well as an additional $130 million revealed today, which will come from the COVID Response and Recovery Fund. The Research, Science and Innovation Minister Dr Megan Woods says the purpose of the funding is to ensure new thinking and inquiry continue post-COVID.
We know in economic downturns that often the temptation is to cut the research budget, whether that be at a company level or at a government level. We're determined not to do that, that there is core infrastructure this country relies on. That is our scientists, our people, but it's making sure that we retain and develop capacity and capability.
Crown Research Institutes, or CRIs, received the most, with just under half of the entire package going towards them. For two CRIs in particular, the Institute of Environmental Science and Research and Agri-Research, it will fund significant campus upgrades. Dr Woods says the money is needed to support CRIs in their work around COVID-19, primary production and environmental management.
This investment will support CRIs to maintain national science capability and jobs, grow talent and perform important research for the benefit of Aotearoa New Zealand.
There is some criticism, however, that the money isn't targeted and doesn't address some of the problems that the country will start to face. An Associate Professor of Physics at the University of Auckland, Nicola Gaston, says one issue is that CRIs are set up to support existing industries and that won't be looking far enough ahead.
When you look at the need for our economy to change and to be reshaped, to be future-proofed, to address climate change, then there need to be more direct mechanisms for ensuring that that's going to happen.
She says what would help more would be fast-tracking young entrepreneurs.
So I'm talking about postdoctoral fellowships, and these were cut almost 10 years ago under the last government. And since then, we've really struggled to retain a critical mass of young people post-PhD in New Zealand with enough support for them to really develop their careers here.
One area of the funding which has received praise is the $33 million earmarked towards funding Māori research and development opportunities. The president of the New Zealand Association of Scientists, Professor Troy Baisden, says that money will go a long way.
Our concern has been that Māori researchers and academics are more likely to be on temporary contracts and are vulnerable to falling out of research institutions. If today's announcement precipitates real funding for Māori-led research and Māori careers, I think that's going to be a transformational opportunity.
The government is also designing a loan scheme for research and development for businesses, so they are able to continue with their work. While details are still light on the ground, Megan Woods says the funds will start to become available by the end of the month. For Checkpoint, Harry Locke.
Let's get to some of your feedback now. A lot of you getting in touch about Air New Zealand. This one says, I purchased an overseas trip and also paid for an additional bag. When I went to use the credit, they said that the additional money paid for the bag would not be available. My only option was to take a bag I don't need for our weekend escape to Queenstown. It's a small amount, but symptomatic of the cavalier way Air New Zealand is treating its customers. Lee has got into touch to say, I think Air New Zealand has done an excellent job of keeping contact with its customers. I've received more updates from the airline than any other business. I have a credit and fully understand why they are retaining it. I would prefer the airline survive as our national airline, and I'm happy to contribute. I have been critical of the airline in the past, but have confidence around their current setting. Let's give them a break, says Lee. This one, though, says, this is monopolistic abuse. I run a business and would not hesitate to pay my customers if I cannot supply as promised. Pay up, Air New Zealand. You have $1 billion plus in the bank, plus a government loan, plus aircraft capital. Your shareholders have to take the hit. Martin says, I understand there are 240,000 credits owed by Air New Zealand. My personal credit is over $4,000. I know lots of people who have 3K credits. You would have to think Cam, as the revenue officer, should know the answer to your question, how much? Which I'm picking is hundreds of millions, not tens of millions, owed to its customers by Air New Zealand. This amount is now a liability for Air New Zealand. Where's the CEO? Someone else says, Vicky. It's not that they haven't paid out in every case, but we can't get hold of them when we try to rebook. They just say, ring us. Excuse me? Just try that, says Vicky. It is the way we have been treated generally, no communication. We've tried to get the CEO, by the way, no luck.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leātawa tēnei. The president of the Police Association says the death of a man in custody in Hawera is not the result of physical force by officers. 3 police officers who have name suppression have been charged with manslaughter. The officers allegedly failed to provide necessary medical care to the 55-year-old. But the president of the Police Association, Chris Cahill, told Checkpoint he has been made aware that no force or violence was used by the officers.
The death is not alleged to have been occurred because of any application of force by any police officers.
Chris Cahill says it is potentially the first time that police officers in New Zealand have been charged with manslaughter. Air New Zealand says it can't afford to refund all passengers who want their money back for flights cancelled because of the COVID-19 pandemic. The airline says it would have to dip into its $900 million government loan to be able to give customers cash refunds and needs that money to help it stay afloat. Its Chief Financial Officer Cam Wallace told Checkpoint he's sorry the credit system hasn't been more user-friendly.
I agree that the process for availing or using these credits has not been smooth. It hasn't been fast and efficient enough. Probably the biggest single factor is that in level 2 restrictions under COVID, we originally anticipated we would have less planes flying, and leisure travel originally wasn't allowed in level 2.
Cam Wallace says customers will be able to access their credits online by the end of July. In a heated exchange at Parliament, the opposition leader Todd Muller has demanded the Prime Minister take charge and move the country to COVID alert level 1 immediately. Jacinda Ardern has brought forward the date at which ministers will consider relaxing restrictions to Monday. But the National Party says that's not soon enough. Mr Muller repeatedly pressed the issue with Ms Ardern during question time.
Isn't it time for a captain's call on level 1 so a team of 5 million New Zealanders can get back to rebuilding this country and recovering their jobs?
I have proudly made captain's calls all the way through, and it is one of the reasons that alongside our team of 5 million, we are the envy of the world in terms of our position right now.
Jacinda Ardern responding to Todd Muller in Parliament. The Director-General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, is refusing to say what advice he will be giving Cabinet as it considers the move to level 1. Today, there were no new cases of COVID in the country, marking the 12th consecutive day with 0 cases. Level 1 effectively means border restrictions remain, but all current rules and restrictions on businesses are lifted. Dr Bloomfield says today's result is very encouraging.
When we first went into alert level 2, my advice was that we spend a full 28 days, that's 2 incubation periods in alert level 2. Given that what we've seen so far, and if that continues, I'll be certainly reviewing that advice and be giving updated advice to Cabinet. I don't want to preempt what that advice will be, but I think that all the signs are good.
The Director-General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield. Cities across the US are under curfew measures aimed at preventing another night of angry protests over the killing in police custody of the unarmed black man George Floyd. The BBC's Peter Bowes reports.
After a week of violent protests and looting, curfews in cities across the country were imposed early in the evening to try to head off another night of trouble. But some demonstrators refused to go home. The Department of Defense said it had moved about 1,600 US Army troops to military bases in the National Capital Region. In his first comments about the unrest, the former Republican President George W. Bush said he and his wife Laura were anguished by the brutal suffocation of Mr. Floyd, and they were disturbed by the injustice and fear that was suffocating the country.
Peter Bowes reporting. The first of 6 flights to return Indian citizens home will arrive in New Zealand tomorrow. The High Commission of India says around 2,000 Indians are stuck in New Zealand and want to make use of flights organised by the Indian government. The first flight will arrive in Auckland at 1:30 in the afternoon and is expected to be carrying New Zealanders returning home. High Commission Second Secretary Paramjit Singh says due to social distancing requirements, they don't expect everyone who wants a flight will get one. It's 4.5 minutes past 6. New Zealand's rugby head of professional rugby, Chris Lendrum, says the new red card replacement rule will improve the game for fans. Kicking off on Saturday week, Super Rugby Aotearoa will allow red-carded players to be replaced 20 minutes after they've been sent off. Lendrum says a red card early in a match can unfairly influence the outcome.
It's a balanced decision, and a player who infringes to a red card level will still face the same sanction in terms of being sent from the field and the same judicial process. But we're mindful of the fans and the quality of the game. We'll be interested to see how it plays out.
Chris Lendrum. FIFA President Gianni Infantino says he supports players in the German Football League who protested on the pitch about the death of George Floyd. England and Borussia Dortmund forward Jadon Sancho was booked after lifting his match shirt to reveal a Justice for George Floyd message on a T-shirt underneath. The German Football Association is reportedly considering disciplinary action against Sancho, but Infantino says Sancho and others deserve applause, not punishment, for saying no to racism. That's the news.
I'm Catherine Ryan. Tomorrow on 9 to noon, new research into a free social initiative helping ex-prisoners get their driver's licences finds half have found jobs. The story of how a Philip Roth novel unravelled 70 years of puritanical censorship in Australia. Breaking down classroom walls, how are children doing in modern learning environments? And Chris Schultz reviews The Lovebirds and Space Force. Join me on 9 to noon on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Taranaki, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Rain spreading south tonight, briefly heavy, followed by occasional showers. Possible thunderstorms in the north and west. For Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, generally fine, but scattered rain this evening and a few spots of rain from tomorrow afternoon. Whanganui to Wellington, also wide at upper. Fine at first, cloud increasing and occasional rain from the evening, possibly heavy tomorrow. Marlborough, Nelson and Buller, rain developing tonight, possibly heavy, clearing in Buller tomorrow. Westland and Fiordland, periods of rain, snow lowering to 800 metres tomorrow morning, then clearing to fine from tomorrow afternoon. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, cloud increasing, scattered rain tonight, becoming widespread tomorrow with snow lowering to about 800 metres. And Chatham Islands, low cloud, drizzle patches turning to rain tomorrow. You're with RNZ National. It's 7 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna, and kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. A former police crisis negotiator says there are strict rules for checking on and caring for prisoners in police custody, and records have to be signed off by a senior officer. 3 police officers are facing manslaughter charges following a death in custody at the Hawera station just over a year ago. The charges allege the officers were grossly negligent in their duty of care to the 55-year-old man. The trio has been stood down from duties. During his career in the force, Lance Burdett led an investigation into a serious alleged assault by police officers. We spoke via video Skype a little earlier, and I started by asking him how high the threshold is for manslaughter charges.
For manslaughter in general, there has to be, well, first of all, for any death, I mean, it's a tragedy that this has happened, and for any death, there has to be a link, and it's called a causal link. In other words, a direct cause attributable to somebody else for the death. So that's the first indicator. Now, manslaughter is a little bit reduced. I think in the America, a place like that, they call it murder in the 3rd degree. So it means that something either has or hasn't been done that is a direct link to the death.
So the police statement says very little, but there is a paragraph that's quite interesting. It says that the allegation is that the officers were grossly negligent in their duty of care to the victim and that this negligence was a causal factor in their death. Does that tell us much?
Yes, they obviously, well, I don't know anything about the case. I don't think many people do, but something has happened where they haven't done something that they were supposed to have done, but it has to be more than perhaps they haven't made a check or they haven't done, a process. So when somebody's arrested, if I take a step back, when somebody's arrested, you go through a process and you ask a number of questions, and some of those questions are about health and well-being. And you, according to the list that you fill out, the form you fill out, gives you a risk factor. And from that determines how you deal with that person. So it might be if they've got a medical condition or perhaps unstable in their thoughts, that it's on you, on the person who's processing them, to get some medical help, some assistance. And it could be as much as every hour checking on them, down to 30 minutes, down to 15 minutes. Perhaps if it's somebody who is suicidal, it might be putting a person watching them 24 hours a day and getting medical treatment. So it depends on the risk factors involved as to what you should or shouldn't do.
We know from the original press release that the police put out that the person who was arrested is described as intoxicated. So where alcohol is involved and you are placing someone in custody, what generally are the requirements in keeping an eye on that person?
Yeah, so the rules are slightly different when it's intoxication. So it's from memory, 15-minute checks. So every 15 minutes there has to be a check made. But, for somebody that's intoxicated, and depending on where it is and where the station is, etc., and I realise it's Haurera, it's not a busy place. It may be that you have to sit with the person. I would certainly, if they were severely intoxicated, it might be an opportunity to get a doctor or a nurse, and even a nurse would do. And again, it depends on that level of intoxication, and it could be that the person's quite lucid, drunk, but lucid, and then they become drunker because they've consumed excess alcohol just before being arrested. So it's quite a fine line.
So who checks the checkers? Who keeps an eye on the police officers to make sure that they've ticked the right boxes and they're following the right regime in terms of looking out for the person in custody?
Staff come under a direct supervisor, and that direct supervisor under another. So there is some checks. Now, every time that you do a check on a person, and let's call them a prisoner, but certainly a person in custody, you fill out a book. You sign a book to say that I've done those checks and I've done them at specific times. And so you sign it and it's countersigned. Now, the officer in charge of the station, it's their duty then to go and check that those checks have been done and to cross-reference, etc. And the cross-reference could be from video footage. Most stations have them these days, just to make sure that the rules have been followed.
So you've been involved in prosecutions against police officers. How difficult are they? And I mean, this is a small station, and you are potentially looking at sworn officers giving evidence against other officers who they may be closely associated with.
Yeah, and again, police are sworn. You're sworn in to become a police officer at the start, and in that swearing-in process, it is the protection of life and property, but also to do it according to the values of the police. And there's certain, people have pride in the police. I had pride in the police and what I did. Yeah, I mean, we all make mistakes on occasion, but as a general rule, I mean, who hasn't made a mistake? This is more than a mistake. Something has happened. Something quite bad has happened to cause what's occurred here.
And certainly that is the allegation. So, I mean, what does strike you the most from what you know about this?
It's not something that's been taken lightly. So looking at the media statement, the press release that's come out, police consulted quite rightly with the Crown prosecutor, but then either them or the Crown prosecutor has then gone to a Queen's Counsel. So they've taken this to the highest level and they've put 2 or 3, so there's the police, there's the prosecutor and the Queen's Counsel across this to say, yes, there has been something that needs to be looked into here.
Just before you go, obviously you would be watching what's been going on overseas in America. Do you have any concerns now that we're looking at a situation where 3 police officers in New Zealand are facing very serious allegations?
Yeah, look, I hope there's no connection. I can't see there being a connection. I don't know enough about the New Zealand case. But what I will say about what's going on in America is, and it's something that we promote in our business, is humility. Now, if you look at all what's going on in America, the ones where the districts have had the best, and I think Miami, police officers came out of their station to police the protest, and they all took a kneel. And that said, we are with you. And you'll see it right across. There's those beautiful pictures of, and that's what police are about as a general rule. They are there to help. And on occasion, they get it wrong.
And that was Lance Burdett, a former police officer, crisis negotiator and investigator. The Ministry of Health is ramping up testing at the border as the number of COVID cases remains at 0. For the 12th consecutive day, there were no new cases of COVID, and there's still only 1 active case in the country. That means the total number of cases remains at 1,154. Speaking at today's press conference, the Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says testing remains a fundamental pillar of the country's elimination strategy. From next week, it is proposing to test everyone who returns to New Zealand, including finalising details to test everyone twice over a 14-day period.
The testing is supplementary to the ongoing requirement for the 14 days isolation, either in quarantine if someone's symptomatic or in a managed isolation facility. So it's just, I guess, another belt and braces aspect of making sure we've got really good controls at the border. So none of our existing border measures will be relaxed. And in fact, we are also in discussions with Air New Zealand about the possibility of testing of some of their international air crew, particularly the ones coming in from the USA, which in our view is the highest risk place where our crew are travelling to. We're confident in the measures that are already in place for airline crew, Air New Zealand international airline crew. We're just wanting to look at what other measures, including the role of testing and or a period of self-isolation for international airline crew as part of our overall border measures. And so we're just working through that. It's a conversation. It's not us dictating to them what will be.
Dr Bloomfield says they are also reviewing their current arrangements with international ship crew to ensure New Zealand is meeting their international conventions as well as keeping the borders watertight. On Monday, the Cabinet will consider whether to ease restrictions and place the country under level 1, where there are no requirements for social distancing. But testing remains high and border restrictions continue. Dr Bloomfield wouldn't be drawn on what he will be advising the Cabinet.
It's very encouraging to have had the 12 days in a row of no cases, and clearly that's what we would be wanting to happen. And so I'll be when we first went into alert level 2, my advice was that we spend a full 28-day, that's 2 incubation periods in alert level 2. Given that what we've seen so far, and if that continues, I'll be certainly reviewing that advice and be giving updated advice to Cabinet. I don't want to preempt what that advice will be, but I think that all the signs are good.
And despite the promising test results, he reiterated that elimination is a process rather than a point in time.
And it has these pillars, which include the strict border measures, the widely available testing, rapid case isolation and quick contact tracing. So elimination is not a point in time. And I know there has been speculation on when we might be able to say, here is the point we have eliminated COVID-19. It may well be there is no domestic transmission or domestic onshore infections of COVID-19. It would be great if we reach that point, and it's increasingly looking like we are. But our elimination strategy is ongoing because we clearly still have our measures at the border and a desire to open up the border in a safe way.
Finally, with the onset of winter and with a possible move to level 1, Dr Bloomfield urged anyone with respiratory symptoms to get a free test. It is 18 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Talk about moving to COVID alert level 1 has got the phones ringing again at events companies for the first time in months. The events industry ground to a halt when COVID struck due to strict bans on gatherings. And within days, event managers saw their bookings cancelled or postponed. Among them was Red Pebble Event Design, a small event management company based in Upper Hutt, north of Wellington. Today, the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern announced restrictions around gatherings, currently capped at 100, would be lifted under Alert Level 1. Our video journalist Logan Church spoke to Red Pebble's owner, Michelle Hobson, about what the move to Level 1 would mean for her business.
Excited that we're getting closer to Alert Level 1. Maybe it's still not 100% clear whether, because we're grouped into the event industry, and to date we haven't been, divided from music events or big public events. So maybe a little bit more clarity might be required around in a controlled event. Is that the world's your oyster? Can we just have as many people as we want? Can we have our events for 1,000 back again?
Take me through the last few months. How has it been dealing with the lockdown and your business essentially drying up?
Yep, so probably about 5 days or the week before lockdown, it was becoming apparent, I think, in the media that we were about to enter into a lockdown. Myself and the staff got very busy taking phone calls and emails, cancelled event, cancelled. So we, in 5 days, we lost 7 months worth of business. That was forecasted and confirmed on our books. We lost it all. The only events that weren't sort of lost at that point was probably November and December, probably a bit far out. Some of those events, probably about 60% of those were postponed, and of that 60%, about half of those were rescheduled for 2021, and then the remainder of them have been postponed to later this year. But we still need to, get back, confirm and pick up where we were. So when we went into actual lockdown, I would say things were, I'll say 100% gloomy, that we had no forecasted business. So my staff, I applied for the wage subsidy, which was a great thing. It kept staff employed. So all of my staff received the wage subsidy, and part-timers got it all the others were at 80%. Some staff worked from home, which was really just looking at things that we could do differently, but that was probably more to keep them engaged. We came back to level 3. Between level 3 and level 2, the staff have returned to work, and up until maybe within the last week, it's just been workshop-y type things, and then I'd say within the last week we've started to have active communications. Meetings have started up with brides, grooms and some of our corporate clients.
Going forward, do you think there is a future for an events industry in New Zealand, and if so, what do you think that would look like?
I think the events industry will look different. I think it will be smaller. I think it will take a big step back. If we look at corporates and companies as being in that hub, will corporates who have just lost money and they're making redundancy, they've got less money, let's say they might have spent $50,000 on an awards dinner, do they think that's politically correct to do that? Don't know. I think that when corporates go to make decisions later this year on whether they're going to have a big Christmas party or their awards or their conference gala dinners, I don't think it will be about COVID-19 safety. I think it's going to be an ethical question for them. So I think the general talk within the industry is that it will be a 12 to 18 month recovery for our sector.
So where are things at now, and what is the plan going forward over the coming weeks and months?
Where we're at now is we've started to engage, I suppose, communicating with our venues within Wellington. So we've started up meetings with the people that are managing those venues to understand what their sort of plans are. We've started to contact our clients again to say, hi, how's it going? What's happened with your event? What's happened with your wedding? And then we'll just touch base with everyone really. So I suppose one of our key things next week is to make contact with all of our past clients, and for me to say thank you, because I look at people within the industry and some of those people may make it and some people won't. And I look that we're lucky all of my staff will keep their employment. I will keep my business. And that is because we were so strongly supported before this happened, and we're in a position to move forward.
Michelle Hobson speaking to Logan Church, and the government is expected to decide if New Zealand will move to Alert Level 1 on Monday. The death of unarmed black man George Floyd while in police custody in the US has galvanised activism around the world, including an outpouring of support from the Pacifica community here. Advocates say Pacific people can relate to the targeting and harassment by police that the Black Lives Matter movement highlights, and it raises concerns for the community here. Dominic Godfrey reports.
Black Lives Matter! Black Lives Matter! Black Lives Matter!
The Pacifica lawyer and union organiser Lisa Fox says she went to Monday's protest to show solidarity with Black Lives Matter and to let the US know the world is watching.
When I watched that video of the murder of George Floyd, I just felt this really visceral rage that something like that could happen, and I thought that protesting is an important way of doing something about that.
Ms Fox says the huge turnout of young brown faces among the 10 to 15,000 strong Auckland protest shows it was important to many in the community.
The Black Lives Matter movement really resonates with us in New Zealand as Pacifica people because we connect with their struggle. You know, our histories are different, but the fundamental experience of systemic racism is the same.
The Pacific Climate Warriors were at Monday's protests to tautoko their African-American sisters and brothers. Their Auckland coordinator, Christopher Tenisio, says Pacific people in the climate space share similar disparities when looking for justice from large, powerful, predominantly Western nations.
The biggest injustice is that our Indigenous don't have a voice, and we find that that's similar to the movement of the Black Lives. Yeah, the injustices of climate and the injustices of racism, we find similarities between the two movements.
Mr Tenisio says he'd hate to see a more US style of policing here, but racism and profiling already happens in Aotearoa. He says arming police would risk the safety and security of Pacific communities.
Police trialled armed policemen in Manukau, and that's where I live. And myself and the Warriors, we were quite threatened and quite scared that our police officers were going to be carrying arms in our suburbs. We find that there was no need for that. Sure, there's issues that are happening in our suburbs, so we didn't see that we'd had to go to such drastic levels of bringing guns into New Zealand.
A matua of the New Zealand civil rights movement, the Polynesian Panthers' Will Ilolahia, is against the trial of armed response teams in New Zealand. He cites police statistics over the last decade to show how people of colour are already suffering.
67% of those that have been shot by this so-called special squad or armed defender squad are Māori or Pacific. And then when you correlate that to similar struggles of Indigenous and people of colour, i.e. where Black Lives Matter, that's the reason why we came out in force.
Lisa Fox says the many negative statistics around health, education and income disparity are also common themes which need to be addressed.
Because when we look at our people, particularly our Pacific women, we are the lowest paid in New Zealand, with, of course, our Māori sisters and brothers next. And so that ethnic pay gap, and they talk about it in America, that income divide along racial lines is very much an issue here in New Zealand.
She says this has manifested itself in an economic apartheid in Auckland, where suburbs are now divided along racial lines. She says this has led to a sense of political hopelessness for many Pacifica youth who see their power in protest. Mo te hōtaka o te ahiahine, ko Dominic Godfrey tēnei.
Coronavirus restrictions have continued to be relaxed across Europe today. Gyms and bars have been allowed to reopen in several towns and cities in Germany, despite concerns the lockdown is being lifted too quickly there. France has removed most of its controls, allowing bars and cafes to open, along with museums and beaches. But stricter measures are still in place in Paris, where the risk of infection is higher than elsewhere in the country. From there, here's the BBC's Lucy Williamson.
The sight of chairs and tables stacked in darkened cafe windows was a sign of France's social and economic coma. Today, for the first time in more than 2 months, there are people sipping coffee in the sunshine at my local cafe. There are new rules. A maximum of 10 people per table, 1 metre between tables, and no standing at the bar. Staff and anyone getting up to use the toilet will need to wear a mask. Here in Paris, it's only terraces that are allowed to open. The mayor has said that any establishment without one can use pavements or car parks. But with the virus still circulating here more widely than elsewhere, how safe do customers feel?
It's something strange to explain, but to share a coffee with someone else is a part of the Parisian way of living.
It was the thing I missed the most during the lockdown, to be able to come and sit whenever I wanted to have a drink in a cafe.
A new mobile app, Stop COVID, will be available for download from today to help track and trace new infections. But the government has said it's pleased with how the virus has responded to the lifting of lockdown so far. After more than 28,000 deaths and months of fear and economic coma, France is slowly coming alive again.
And that was Lucy Williamson reporting from Paris. Just before we go, lots of you getting in contact about Air New Zealand, many of you still not happy. Someone says their elderly parents were going to the UK for a birthday, 90th birthday. They probably won't get there again and they would like their money back. They want Air New Zealand to make exceptions. Thanks for being with us. Back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The police union says the death of a man in custody in Hawera is not the result of physical force by the officers who have been charged with manslaughter. Air New Zealand says it cannot afford to refund everyone impacted by flight cancellations during the COVID-19 outbreak. The first of 6 flights to return Indian citizens home will arrive in New Zealand tomorrow. And 100,000 people have been evacuated and coronavirus patients moved out of makeshift hospitals as a strengthening cyclone heads towards Mumbai. Those are the headlines. Our next news will be at 7. Then it's Nights with Brian Crump.
Tonight on Nights, discover the art of fog walking. Part exercise, part art, part supporting Auckland businesses during this month's moon cycle, possibly when it's misty. We're taking on Darwin's Law with this week's Hump Quiz, and Queenstown-raised Terry Anderson offers her thoughts on how to bring tourism